This is Hymns from the Lighthouse, Dig My Grave. Written by C.J. Amato. Narrated by Emmanuel Menjivar and Elizabeth Ahrens. Prelude, The Rhythm of Royalty. Cycle 32A2A, Autumn, Revolution 77th of the Blue. Location, nowhere. A boat approaches the dock, and the gravedigger stands, waiting. The small watercraft crests at the top of the last massive wave. The drop before them sends the men's jewels straight up, shoving their Adam's apple aside and making a new home in the high-valued real estate of their throats. They have never been this tall, able to reach out and touch the clouds themselves. As a child sitting under the table and dreaming, soaring through the air like a dragon, one could only imagine what a cloud might feel like. Is it soft as a pillow, or will your hands simply pass through it like mist? Now, these men had the chance to know. All one must do is just reach out and touch it. Supposing they had a hand free, that is. Inside, the 6 men clutch the boat's sidewalls for their lives. On a mountain of blue, these men are on top of the world, but not for long. Speed builds, wind and water blind them. Halfway down the steep blue slope, the boat spins end over end like a bottle in a kissing game. Eyes pinch shut and fingers grip painfully. They are turning in eternity, in the darkness of their minds. Slamming hard on the steady water sends them off their seats, burning water piercing their eyes. The vessel corrects, continues moving on its own towards the white light. One of them finds his voice and is determined to use it, screaming for makers and mothers alike. An older man stands on wobbled knees, spitting the salt from his mouth, while the rest try to keep their dinners down. "Thank the Maker," he said while rubbing his eyes, trying to relieve the burn while ignoring the childish screams next to him. Opening them, he scans the horizon and sees nothing. Nothing but flat blue water and the blinding bright star. He holds his hand to his face toward the sun, about the size of a coin floating on the edge of the world. It was falling, cresting the horizon, and rising again for a new revolution. He looks over at the youngest member of his party. He was leaning his hands on the edge of the boat and resting his head on them, gazing at the sun like a child watching their father ride off to war, never to return. The sun reflecting in the boy's black eyes. "Boy," the older man said, "don't worry. It will rise again. We have time before the black." Trying to comfort the youngster, the veteran man still had to bury the thought of the darkness that would inevitably come. It is only days away now. "No need to worry over the things you can't control," he told himself. The sun was still at its low point. The scorching day was still at bay. Even though it was only autumn, twice a day the sun seared the world. Fortunately, there hasn't been a summer in quite a few cycles now. The older man turns to the rest of the men, still hugging the walls like baby boys on their mothers' breasts. "Okay, boys," he said. "Steady. The waters look calm ahead." "Where is this blasted thing taking us? To the edge of the blue?" That comment had one of the men imagining the vessel taking them to the edge of the world, dumping them over the oblivion where he saw an ocean of stars on black waves. Looking back, the older man sees no sight of the verge, no sign of home. There is nothing but crashing blue waves and hundreds of blue-gray hungry eyes lurking beneath the razor's edge, awaiting one slip, just one misstep. "Sir!" one of the men shouts, pointing behind him. "Look! Landfall!" The older man turns, and to his confusion, in the distance, he sees an island. His brow crinkles, lips draw to a line, but he says nothing. "They said we were alone, that there was nothing outside the 5. The man continued to ramble with no engagement from the older man or the rest of his party. As they approach, he sees the wooden dock and the tower housing the bright white light that they had been following this whole time. That light felt warm and inviting. The men watch the dancing flame, and they all share the same thought. "She is lovely." But the sight of a tall black figure on the dock makes them tense. Only a statue, one of the men thought. They watch the figure swiftly move down the dock, marching towards them with long strides. Gooseflesh waves over them. The hair on the back of their necks stands like soldiers at attention. On board, 4 of the 6 men are very well dressed, in thick, heavy black coats over black buttoned shirts, complemented by dark gray pants. Clearly funeral attire. Wardrobes soaked through by the water journey. 2 men in heavy plate armor escort them, their helmets sitting off to the side with the rest of the gear. The silver-plated armor is trimmed with a windswept gold pattern in its wrapping, newly forged with not a scratch to be seen. More of a ceremonious set of armor than for practical use. Drake scales prove to be much more effective armor in their durability and lightweight. "Get ready," the older man says to the rest as they approach. The boat turns itself sideways as it encounters the dock, the ship's bow hitting the wood, sending up a splash of water. One of the men leans out, lashing a rope at the stern. Another man repeats the same motion, whipping a rope around a post. Then the boat comes to a rest along the dock. The man ties his best double knot for good measure. They did not trust the cursed vessel not to turn around and simply leave them behind. The ship stood only a foot below the pier, but it proved for the men in armor to be difficult to exit the vessel. It's challenging just to stand in this damned thing. The joints of their armor are rendered immobile by the sun and salt. The gravedigger approaches, and the men begin to panic. It is an opposing figure, standing twice as tall as the biggest man anyone would come across. Shrouded by a black cloak, the only thing visible is its hands. They looked familiar enough, except for being twice the size of any standard man's. But if anything to the soldiers there, they would say his hands are very smooth, soft, like he has never done a day's work in his life to keep his hands in that condition. This was a demanding world, and you could tell a lot about a man by his hands, or lack thereof. Its long, crooked wooden shovel is taller than its head, and with every other step, it taps the point into the wood, using the shovel as a walking stick. The shovel's tip enters the dock with a forceful thud, but also with ease, like a knife through water, leaving no marks in the wood. The men notice that the material of its shovel blade isn't metal or even lumber. It was crafted from pure crystal. Sheer beauty, with complexity to its interior. Someone could get lost following all the twists and turns in its design, white sparks of fire shimmering into their black eyes. The sunlight hitting the blade casts sparkling lights in every direction, like stars. With every thud, it gets closer. The shrouded figure is about 20 yards away. "We must get the cargo onto the dock." 2 of the 4 well-dressed men leap onto the pier, while the other 2 begin to pass the payload. By the darkness, he's thick. Thud. Thud. The cargo is shrouded in an ornate white wrapping. The men attempt to pass the payload over diligently, even though nothing could hurt it anymore. Thud. Thud. He's getting closer. 2 men grab the back of the king's shoulders from the top as the 2 men below cradle him from his legs. The 2 armored men were useless. Fools should have known better than to wear such bulky armor for a journey like this. They can barely lift their arms past their shoulder. Fear can make men act like children every so often. They rest the wrapped body of the king on the dock, rolling him over on his back. The 2 men look back at the towering figure. He's right on us. Thud. Thud. The 4 men on the dock lock eyes with their fully armored allies still left on the boat. A chilling wave creeps over them like a cold wind over a fresh grave. "Quick!" one of the armored men sharply whispers to get the men's attention, then passes their equipment. 2 long swords are followed by 2 shields. Lastly, the men's helms, then the gold-plated men themselves. They struggle with the first soldier, pulling with all their might while one pushes from below. He hits the deck like a worm, flopping on his belly with armor metal clanking, lying next to the wrapped body of the recently deceased king. The men did not help him up on his feet, focusing instead on the next man still in the boat. Thud. Thud. He is almost upon them now. 2 men grab each arm of the man still left in the boat. The man below put one of his armored boots on the dock, and they pull. The gauntlet slips off, the soldier falling back hard to land on his rear with a booming crash that sends the boat rocking back and forth. The men curse. Even the ship seems to bang against the dock in frustration. Then, a gauntlet glove still in his hand, like shaking hands with a ghost, they finally notice the thumping stopped. They look over their shoulders, and there it stands. The armored man on the floor promptly gets to his feet. He grabs his sword and his shield, no time for the helm, and stands at the ready in a guarding stance, knees clacking together. All the men can feel it. They were standing on solid wood. However, their knees and stomachs swayed as if standing on water. 3 men surround the king's corpse, 2 over each shoulder and 1 by his feet. They kneel by his side. They do their best to make it look ceremonious, but their swaying instead looks like they all just left the tavern. The one still standing, evidently the leader of this band, takes a big, deep breath. He swallows whatever saliva he has left in his mouth, tasting salt on his dry, cracked lips, wishing that the man still lying in the boat didn't finish all the water they had brought. His long, graying hair is pulled back. Scars litter his face, the most noticeable starting on the right side of his forehead and crossing his eyes straight down his cheek, the pupil lost to a pale eye. He looks more regal than the rest of his party. His graying hair tells the story of a long life, in contrast to his fellowship's youthful jet-black hair. Only one other among them close to the captain's age stops fighting himself and time, shaving his head, leaving just a faint shadow of a lost society of hair. The frightened man walks 3 paces forward, falling to a knee before the gravedigger. He bows his head down, a mixture of water and sweat dripping from his brow. His once fancy attire, now wet and ragged, feels like iron shackles strung all around him, dragging him down back to the dirt. Then, after a few moments of silence, he looks up at the gravedigger, who had not responded to his courtesy. Still kneeling, the man starts. "Greetings," he says with a grumbly voice, breath heavy after his arduous journey. My name is Captain Brooks Windbound. I have been sent here by—" "I know why you are here," a deep, bellowing voice was heard by all the men. They did not hear him from their ears, but their minds. The gravedigger projected his voice directly into their thoughts. Brooks startles, springing to his feet. He studies the bulking figure, looking with his single dark eye, trying to see his face, but cannot. The gravedigger's shroud is the blackest thing the man has ever seen. It was absorbing the sunlight. Nothing shined on the fabric, as if he were standing in complete darkness. It almost seems to have the same color and texture as the skies during the black. Unfortunately, though, not many men have seen those skies, not since the day divinity abandoned them. The more he investigates the gravedigger, especially where its face would be, the more he gets lost in its stare, falling down a black hole. Everything around him goes dark. No sound, no sight. Like being pulled into a dark tunnel. He could almost see his... Why do the lights stop shining? Why are we left alone in the dark? He shakes his head to escape the daze that fell upon him, returning to his senses. Brooks clears his throat and begins again. Here lies King Windbound, King of the Verge, conqueror of the sisters, the digger quickly interrupts. I know who lies there, the gravedigger projects, its deep tone giving way to a more soothing sound. The captain recognizes that voice. However, he can't place it in his memory. Conqueror of the dirt now. I hope the child made it back to his mother in time to say goodbye. That response sends a chill up the captain's spine. He feels the shock settle in his neck. The armored man is shaking to the point his plates rattle at the joints. This gets the gravedigger's attention, causing the man to empty his bladder right there on the dock. Lucky for the armored man, no one notices, although the smell would do nothing to help him later. The gravedigger takes a big step forward, All the men take 3 steps back with a gasp. The gravedigger stands tall over the king now. The sun sits silhouetted behind him, casting a long shadow across the corpse and down the dock. Glancing over to the side, he notices the man still lying on his back in the boat. Hello, the nervous man says, trying to be polite, noticing that the gravedigger is still staring at him. Or rather, detecting the hole of his cloak was pointing his way. After a moment of silence, "Do you need help?" The voice in his mind speaks calmly, friendly. It almost sounds familiar to him, like a past relative that the man hasn't seen since he was a child. "No," the man responds while tapping his hands on the walls of the boat. "I'm quite all right, thank you." He smiles, proudly displaying his brown teeth. The rest look confused. Why is Ralphie speaking to him? They thought. The gravedigger looks for several more seconds before looking back on the king. As he stares at the corpse for a good long while, none of the men would dare interrupt. Finally, it speaks, sounding almost annoyed. "He should have been brought here promptly. The Queen requested the king buried beneath the Great Hall," Brooks answers quickly. Shrieks echo from above like dozens of voracious wyverns. They look to the skies, expecting to see the monsters descending, ripping, slashing flesh for an easy meal. The sun's protection holds no comfort for them now. Then it dissipates. This quickly silences them all. "How did that work out for the Queen?" the mysterious voice responds, and the captain grimaces. The gravedigger leans over, grabs the lower part of the shroud where the king's ankles were bound together, stands, and walks away with the king in tow with no regard. The gravedigger stands tall. The only part of the king still touching the dock's wooden boards is his head. As it walks, the king's head bounces on every passing board. Is that it?" Brooks shouts in confusion, watching as the gravedigger walks away to the rhythm of the king's bouncing head. After a few more steps, and more than a few head bounces, it answers in a whisper. "Yes, that is it. Now what do we do?" "Go home, Captain Brooks," it says. "Go home and enjoy your life, while it's still yours to enjoy." Brooks looks back and forth at his men. No matter how far it walked, that voice sounds like it was whispering directly to him. All his men look confused and stand as still as gravestones. This is a private conversation. "Stay on the path," the gravedigger continues. "Follow the light back, and do not stray. And remember, do not disturb the water." "Will his soul be at rest?" Brooks is compelled to ask, though he knows he will not like the answer. "I am not here to bury his soul," the voice whispers to them all now, each hearing a different yet familiar voice. "I am going to bury his anger." Brooks' mind races, but now the captain feels compelled to stay silent. His black eye darts back and forth between his men and the boat. That single poignant eye sings a story to his men of an adventure home. The men promptly board to get as far from this strange place as possible. But as they climb in, pushing the man still lounging on his back, only now in the same spot as their recently deceased monarch, frozen in fear from the sight of that specter, the ropes fastened to the pier undo themselves and fly into the hands of 2 befuddled soldiers. Brooks realizes that to complete their journey, they must make a return trip across the dead ocean. They all turn in unison and stand in awe at the sight of enormous water mountains rising and crashing from the sea. The king's head bounces on the dock's few remaining boards, then comes to rest on soft black sand. The gravedigger's wheelbarrow waits obediently for its return, relieved the damn thing didn't wander off again. It had a habit of being untrustworthy and never staying in place. The digger tosses its shovel in, showing no value to the priceless object. Then it grabs the king by his bound ankles and throws him in just as carelessly. The corpse hits the barrow with a smash, and then the gravedigger lifts from the front and begins to push, making his way up the small hill of sand and passing the lighthouse. A tower set on the shore. It lifted from the sand black in color, continuing to the top of the structure where it began to turn white. The tower looks like it is moving, textured rippling waves starting from the bottom of the base to the top. At the crown is a gigantic flame, brightly dancing, a white flame seen from a great distance, like the sun itself. Unlike the sun, this flame is welcoming to stare at, with no danger to the eyes. A warm fire inviting like a beautiful lit candle resting on the shore. When the wave reaches the top, it would cause the flame to dance and briefly shine even brighter. The flame takes the shape of a woman, dancing, twirling, and spreading her arms of joyous light to the world. Her pleasure saddens the spectre. The digger is happy for her, but he knows it will not last. When the men reach the shores of their journey's end, her light will go out. The gravedigger passes her with a turned shoulder, hoping she did not notice. But, lost in her delight, it passes unseen. The digger approaches the apex of the hill, and its small part of the island becomes visible. In front is a magnificent clearing, lush with green grass, bushes, and small trees. 2 small huts lie to the right. Beyond, the ground appears to have been fractured. Long ago, by the look of it, men would say by the first great atrocity known as the Great Divide, although this place did not seem to have ties to the rest of the world. A land stuck between nowhere and nothing. A petite arcing stone bridge crosses the gap. At the center, a tall, skinny black gate stands with a bright light looming from behind. The sight of the entrance gives the gravedigger a feeling of remorse, like a memory of a past loved one that sends you spiraling off in mournful remembrance. The gravedigger pushes the wheelbarrow over to one of the small huts before it takes the initiative, completing the rest of the journey to the house. The digger unloads its cargo slightly more carefully than before. This is the preparation hut. The gravedigger lifts the man, cradling him in its arms. Even though the king is massive, he looks like a child in the arms of the gravedigger. He sets him down on a table in the middle of the room. The rest of the hut is laid bare. The gravedigger inspects the shrouded body for a few moments, pacing around him once and with the tip of its perfect finger, placing it upon the king's forehead with hesitation. The gravedigger slides its finger down his face slowly, coming to a rest at the chin, lifts its finger, and the shroud separates perfectly, as if the cloth is cut by a surgical blade, revealing the king's face that is still frozen, perfectly portraying his last horrendous moment of life.